Welcome to the Grove Podcast, where we feature Evergreen members and their real-life stories of salvation, transformation, struggle, and hope. I'm Joy Gabbert, and today I have the Dietz.
Thank you.
Oh,
Hello.
thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for coming. I'm excited to share another one of our staff and staff wives' stories. So why don't you guys tell us a little bit about your family and where you each serve at Evergreen?
Okay. We have 4 kids, and our oldest is about to go into high school, which is so weird. And we have our youngest is a kindergartner, so we're kind of all over. I work in the preschool ministry on Sunday mornings and with the Awanas on Wednesday nights. And I'm a greeter. That's one of my favorite things is I'm doing the bulletins on Sunday mornings too.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm worship and prayer pastor.
Okay, so we've had a lot of people from the worship team, but we haven't had people from the prayer team, I think, on yet. So tell us a little bit about that ministry.
Yeah, so it is still, evolving. And, even right now, Michael is doing a series on spiritual warfare, and he and I are having conversations about future of prayer ministry and what that looks like. But, right now, we have a Tuesday night prayer meeting open to anybody in the auditorium at our church. And
what time is that at?
It's at 6:30 and usually goes till about 7:45. And then a couple of years ago, we started what's called the 918 initiative, which 918 is the area code of Tulsa, but it's also morning, noon, and night. And so that comes from Daniel, the book of Daniel, when Daniel knew that he could be put to death for praying to his God. And the Bible says that he went upstairs into his room like he had always done, got down on his face 3 times a day and just cried out to God. And I love that story. And I just love that picture. And, there are other religions that are super serious about prayer. And, we have the one true God. And oftentimes I think as Christians, we don't take advantage of that benefit that we have, that we can come straight before the throne of grace and cry out to our God. And so it was just the 918 initiative is something we implemented here as a challenge to our church. We give 3 prayer points every month for our church to pray for 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night. And but what's cool is that prayer initiative I know of 26 other churches that are doing it now. And so it's a really cool thing. And the dream is, man, that it would get the global church praying. And I don't know, how far God will take that, but, so anyway, yeah. And then, especially within the worship ministry specifically, we've really tried to incorporate prayer in everything that we do, whether it's like our Sunday morning rehearsals or Wednesday night rehearsals or whatever, our team nights. We want that to be a value that we hold as a worship team. And so, but yeah, and then there are several other things that, like I said, Michael and I are talking through right now about what that looks like for the future of our church specifically.
And don't you also arrange the burden bearers for Sunday?
Yes. And so we just started a new-ish ministry, and I think we're just going to be calling it the prayer team soon. But it's just this ministry that we have that during the music portion of our worship on Sundays, we have 5 or 6 people come down front or spread around the room. And, if there are people in our congregation who have a heavy heart or going through something heavy or just need prayer for anything, they can come down to one of our prayer team members and just have them intercede for them. And so And that's been really cool, not just for those who are coming to be prayed over, but those who are praying for those who need to be prayed over.
Sure.
I've heard testimonies of our prayer team who are just, man, God has used those times to just impact them in a huge way, because they've got to follow up with those people and say, man, God answered that prayer or whatever. And so that's been really fun just to watch blossom. So.
Yeah. Shanna, why don't you kick us off and tell us about your upbringing?
Okay. I was raised in a Catholic home. My mom was Catholic. My dad is Methodist. But we went to Mass every Sunday. I was taught early on, I want to follow the rules. I want to do what I'm supposed to. My parents are just really wonderful. They're so loving, and I could not have asked for a better childhood. When I was 13, I was asked to go to a church camp, and I heard the gospel. I had it explained by the camp preacher that we could never be good enough. And even if we did keep the rules, that wasn't enough. And that Jesus came and paid the price for my sin. It was just this gift that was an opportunity for me to receive salvation if I wanted to ask Jesus to forgive me of my sins and to save me. And so I made that decision at camp. I was excited to come home to tell my family. Man, I was met with, oh, that's okay. You didn't have to. We baptized you as a baby. And I was kind of like, I think that's not the same thing. And so I wanted to keep doing church with my friends. I wanted to grow in that. But my mom was pretty adamant that she wanted me to continue with just the Catholic Church. And so she said, that's cool. I respect that. You did that. But I want you to keep doing Mass with me until you're 18. And then at 18, you can decide. And so I said, okay. And they were super supportive, gave me my first Bible and devotional things to work through. And I went to church with my friends as often as I could, Wednesday night things that I could make it to or whatever. But when I got a car, when I turned 16, I was able to hit Mass early in the morning with my family and then drive over to the other church to make it for their later service. And I did that for a little bit. And then when I turned 18, I just, I scheduled to get baptized, and I got baptized, and my family came to support me in that. And I just went all in with my friends at the Baptist church.
And then after that, you ended up going to college for a little while?
Yeah, I did a year at the community college right out of high school, just in my hometown. And I worked as the youth pastor intern. Anyway, so I did college for a year there. And then I moved with my little sister when she graduated. We moved out of town to Wayland Baptist University, and I did a semester there.
Okay. So Zach, why don't you go ahead and tell us about your upbringing?
Yeah. So I grew up a preacher's kid, pastor's kid, PK, whatever. My dad, growing up until I was, I think in middle school, my dad was a youth pastor. And so, that was a cool thing. And then when I was in middle school, my dad transitioned to become a missions pastor. And so, man, even I think while he was youth pastor, he was still passionate about missions. And so, I remember my first mission trip, I was a kid and I was just going along with my dad because apparently they didn't have babysitters. But man, I think that's such a cool, looking back on that, that's such a cool thing that I got to do that as a kid, because I early on in my life saw the importance of missions and saw third world countries where as a kid you're like, man, I mean, I think that had an impact on me of I don't need all these things, and just in other aspects developmentally, I think I look back on that and it just had a huge impact on me. And we can get into our story a little bit of adoption as well. But I remember as a kid going to Mexico, and we went to an orphanage there, and I saw all these kids, and like, man, just had, sorry. I remember seeing all these kids without parents, and I couldn't have been older than 8 years old, but I think that's where God implanted just this heart for adoption in me. And, you know, later on in marriage, Shannon and I were able to adopt. We never thought it would be domestically. We thought it would always be overseas because we had both been to China and we had a heart for the Chinese people. But God gave us a daughter it's been amazing. And, you know, when we came to Evergreen, there was a big sort of pool of people who were fostering, and that had never even been on our radar to foster. And there was a lady on our worship team who brought this little girl. She had fostered countless kids in her home. And she brought this little girl to church one day. You know, every time she'd bring her, I'd play with her or whatever. And she told us, she said, you know, I don't know how long I'm going to be able to keep her. I've got too many kids in our home right now. And so Shanna and I went home and prayed about it. And just like we did a whole weekend of the foster training, we were able to bring her into our home.
How old was she?
She was 9 months when we got her. And so we've had her since she was 9 months, and now she's 10 years old. And it's just been a huge blessing. But yeah. So anyway, and then growing up a pastor's kid, sorry, there was a little rabbit trail. I, at 7 years old, was riding in the back of our car, and my sister was sitting in the back seat with me. And I just remember asking my mom, who was driving, you know, what do I have to do to make Jesus my savior, you know? And she said, well, you know, you have to pray to him and ask him to be the Lord of your life, and kind of explain the gospel to me. And, you know, I'd heard it before in church. So my sister in the back of the car led me in that prayer. And fast forward several years, I was 15 and went to a church camp, which my dad was not youth pastor anymore, but went to our church camp in Colorado. And during the worship time, man, I just had this realization, like, I do not have a relationship with God. Like, you know, I said the prayer, but there was really no progression in my faith walk. And so my best friend was sitting next to me, and I said, hey dude, like, can I talk to you? He's like, sure. So we go outside during the worship, and I just was like, man, I don't know that I have a relationship with God. And kind of explained, I said the prayer, you know, so he's like, well, let's pray right now. So, you know, for years, I when I shared my testimony, I said, well, that's the time I got saved. And I think, you know, looking back now, I think there's something to a childlike faith coming to Jesus as a child. And I believe that in my heart was genuine, but I think what was lacking was true discipleship, to know how to grow in my faith and, you know, bear fruit and abide in Jesus. And, so, you know, I truly do believe I was saved at 7. I just really needed to know how to grow in my faith and bear fruit. And so, but the age 15 was when I really realized, like, there really isn't anything here that I'm doing with God other than, you know, going to church and being a good kid or whatever. But that's where my faith walk really began, was age 15. And so,
well, that's interesting to me because, I mean, I became a Christian when I was 4, and some of my children have become Christians or prayed the prayer at least very young. And so what is something that you might say to parents who pray the prayer with their young child. And like, I know for me, it was very much genuine. And I'm just praying that it is genuine with my children. So what would you say to parents of how they can help their kids to continue to have that childlike faith, but then to grow in faith so that they can make sure that it was real?
I would say that the primary role for discipleship is with the parents. It starts with the parents. I think a lot of parents bring their kids to church and to youth group and to children's church and hoping that will have an impact on their kids, which it should. And I think that's all great stuff. But I think discipleship begins at home, and training your children to live the way that they should go begins at home. And so, like, we spend time in the Word every morning at our house. We spend time at prayer at night. I've spent time with my oldest boys going through books of the Bible. And, I think, like, so far, all of our children, except for our youngest, has given their lives to Jesus. And we have tough conversations a lot about, like, we talk about fruit and what that looks like and growing. And I think, man, if your kid comes to you and says, I want to give my life to Jesus, I think our first reaction as Christian parents is usually like, okay, well, let's talk about that. Like, let's make sure you understand. And that's good. They need to understand the gospel. Like, we need to clearly explain the gospel to our kids. But I think, like, trust that, because they're coming, like Jesus says, no, let them come to me. Like his disciples were trying to get the kids away from him. And he says, no, let them come to me. And I think there's just something so innocent about a child's faith. Yeah. And so we should encourage that, but then we should also disciple them well. And yes, there's the church, but I think it's also important that we as parents are modeling a life of faith in front of them as well. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so after age 15, now you're starting fresh with the Lord and your relationship and starting to grow. And this is also around the time that you started learning guitar, right?
Yeah. So I was actually the first sibling. I'm the youngest sibling out of 4. And I was the first sibling to receive a guitar. But I was the last sibling to learn the guitar. I really didn't have an interest until about age 15. And both my brothers had been playing and leading worship, and my dad led worship in the youth group. And so I picked up a guitar, and the main reason was my middle brother was going to be leaving the youth group soon in the next year or two. And I saw kind of a void in our youth group that needed to be filled to have a worship leader. And so I picked up the guitar, and I wasn't very good. I knew about 3 chords, and I'm sure that got real annoying. So yeah, that really just kind of, I started playing in the youth group, and had never, I don't want to jump too far ahead in the story, but I'd never really considered ministry in the future until a guy came and led worship for our youth group for a Disciple Now. And he had a conversation with me and just said, hey man, I see something in you. And I really think you need to pray about whether God wants to use this gift in you.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the catalyst for me to really jumpstart that thought in my head of ministry one day.
The seed was planted.
Yeah.
Yeah. So. Tell me a little bit about either one of you, how you guys met.
We had a Spanish class together in high school. Mm-hmm. Okay. And we interacted there. I was dating someone else, and so we didn't talk a whole lot other than working on papers together.
if that's what you want to call it. I cheated off of her papers.
Oh.
Yeah. She was just to put things in perspective, she was number 3 in her class out of like 260 something students.
Class.
But yeah, we met in Spanish.
We met there. And then he was leading worship for a youth service that
I don't remember what age I was. I was probably a sophomore in high school or something. And I don't remember, but she was allowed to come on Wednesday nights.
Yeah, I think at this point I had my own car. I mean, like I was driving.
She was allowed to come to this worship service that we were doing on Wednesday nights. And, you know, from leading from the stage, like I was just able to see her worship. And like, I don't know that I had ever seen anybody worship the way she worshiped. She just without abandon, you know, like on her face, lifting her hands, just watching her express to her God how she felt in worship. And that was just huge to me. And I remember after those nights, like I would strategically, like after worship, we would go upstairs and play games and stuff. And I remember specifically playing Old Maid like every week. And we would strategically be put at the same table playing Old Maid every week. And so she was dating this guy, and she told her best friend that, hey, I think I have a crush on Shanna Dietz. And her friend was like, well, you got to break up with the other guy. So she's like, okay. And so she did finally. And then even after she did that, it took me like 7 months to finally get the guts to ask her out. So but one of my friends who is a mutual friend, I was like, dude, there's no way this girl likes me. And he was like, dude, I'm telling you, I've had a conversation with her. She likes you. And I was just, you know, I finally pulled the trigger when I heard that she was thinking about moving on. So, yeah.
And was that when you guys were in college then at that point? Or was this still high school?
Yeah, I think I was in college. Yeah, we had already graduated high school when we finally started dating.
Yeah, I'm probably getting dates mixed up. But
yeah, that's okay.
Anyway.
But Zach, when you did go to school for a while, what did you study?
So I wouldn't say I went for a while. I would say I went for a semester. But I was going for sound technology, which is really, I was studying to learn how to work at a recording studio.
Okay.
And how all the acoustics and all that kind of stuff work. And then I landed this job at this incredible recording studio and thought to myself, why am I going to school for this when I've got my dream job? And so...
Now, that job, were you like the sound tech guy at the job or what?
So I was the chief engineer at that studio, and it was like, it literally was a dream come true because I was also playing in a band at the same time, and it was like free studio time for us, which back in the day was like super expensive. So
okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then let's go a little bit into... And how long did you guys date before you got engaged?
I think it was a little over 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then, got engaged. Pretty short engagement because we had dated for so long. So we just...
Quick funny story. Shanna doesn't love this story.
No, I love these stories.
Okay.
They're the best.
We were dating, and I was 2 weeks away from proposing. I had a plan. I had the ring, everything. And we were playing tennis together one night, and we're, just having a good old time. And all of a sudden, Shanna just breaks down crying. And I'm like, what is happening? And she was like, I just want to get married. And so I was like, in my head, I'm going, well, if you could just wait just a little bit, it's going to happen. And so I don't know. I think that she's got some other funny stories where she thought I was going to propose and I didn't.
But I think it was before y'all got engaged, Zach, didn't you start having some health problems? Like your sleep was getting bad?
Yeah. So I want to say I was 24 years old. I've done the math at some point, and it's been 20 years since this started until now. But looking back on my life, like I could see that like I had struggled with anxiety my whole life, and I didn't really know didn't know that term really. When I think it was about 24 or so. That can't be right. No,
20.
It was like 20. Sorry, 20 or 21. Dates are hard. I was going to sleep one night, and I kind of just woke up gasping for air one night, and like just thought to myself, well, that was weird. And laid back down and went back to sleep. Then got back in bed the next night, and it happened again twice. I was like, man, this is weird. What is this? And then it progressively just got worse to where it was happening literally all night. And so I was not getting any sleep. So I went to a doctor, and they did some sleep studies on me, and there was nothing conclusive because the first one I just tossed and turned all night. Nothing happened. The second one, they had put me on a medication that knocked me out cold. And so like I took my medication and I slept perfect the second sleep study. So that one was inconclusive. But like I was on Ambien for 10 years. I mean, and now knowing like that's a short-term drug, it's not to be used for long-term use. And, but I had seen countless doctors done sleep studies, tried different medications, and, you know, they ruled out sleep apnea through several of those studies. And, there were really no doctors who could tell me what was going on. And, it was just more medicine, you know, or let's try a different medicine. And so, last year, man, it had just gotten, I'd really wanted to get off of medication because of the way the medication made me feel. You know, it left me kind of groggy the next day. And, so I told Shanna, and it wasn't really working. I mean, like I was still gasping with the thing. It would cut it out, probably, you know, by 85%, but the rest of the, you know, night I was still gasping. And so it was kind of helping. And
but
so
this is what you said, 20 years of not sleeping well. That's a long time.
Yeah.
Like what other effects on your health or your mental state did that have of not sleeping for 20 years?
Yeah. I mean, it affects your entire life. I was dealing with depression. I was, I lacked motivation, in all areas of my life, my work, my family, you know, you name it. It affected every area of my life. And so, this last year I was, chatting with a buddy at Man Venture, and he was just asking me, cause I've been very vulnerable, with my story with people. And I had a buddy who was just checking on me and said, "Hey, how's your sleep going?" And I said, "Yeah, it's about the same." And there was another guy sitting there who said, "Hey, don't mean to interrupt, but I want to send you a video." And so this video I watched just got me started on like this kind of new journey. And it kind of gave me new motivation to like, I'd kind of lost hope that this was ever, going to get fixed or that I would ever get off medication. And so I watched this video at Man Venture, and, it kind of gave me this new spark. And I went home and told Shanna, I was like, "Hey, like I want to try something completely different that we've never done before." You know, because pause. I had seen my last doctor. I was with my last doctor, who was this brilliant doctor who, had been recommended by so many different people to me, who had diagnosed several different things, of our friends that were very rare, you know? And so it was like, okay, let's
if anybody can help you, it should be
if
him.
anybody can help, this guy can. And so I went to him for like a year and a half. And granted, like he was very like, I want to get to the bottom of this. But after a year and a half, I went in, for a checkup, and he said, "Man, I don't have anything else to try. I don't know what else to try." And so that was the moment where I was like, okay, there's no hope for this.
Yeah.
And the guy sends me the video, I watch it, and I come to Shanna and I say, hey, let's try stuff we've never done before. What this guy was talking about in this video was this genetic test that can tell you like what supplements your specific body will
Like lacking
absorb. And those kind of things. And so I did the test. It was really expensive, but it was kind of, I was like, this is the year, like we're going to get to the bottom of this. And, and I told Shanna, I'm going to give whatever we do a really good shot. And so I did that for a long time and really didn't notice any results. But it really, I was still kind of had that spark of like, all right, I'm determined to get this figured out. And so after a while of that, I started researching some more things, and this guy's website popped up. It's called sleepscienceacademy.com. And it was like this money back guarantee. It was expensive as well, but it was this money back guarantee thing. And you do a consult with him. And so I did a free consult with him, and he was like, over the phone, he named what I was dealing with, and no other doctor had ever named what it was that I was dealing with. And he said, listen, dude, I can help you. I promise you. But I was super skeptical. I was like, okay, but really tell me about the money back guarantee. Like, what does that look like? You know, and really pressing him on that. And he was like, man, you will get your money back if it does not work. And so we prayed about it, and I was going to sell a guitar to be able to afford it, and was just telling a friend about this. And this friend said, well, hold on. And he came back to me and he said, hey, if you want to do that, it's covered. And so, just the body of Christ, being the body of Christ. And we're so grateful. And I went through, it's an 8-week program. Within the first week, I was sleeping better than I can remember. And so little by little through that 8 weeks, I was tapering off of my medication, and that's their goal, is to get you off of medication. And by the end of it, I was completely off, still am completely off medication and sleeping normal. Like I still have bad nights of sleep, but everybody does. But it's crazy. And so, I'm just so grateful that, I look back through that time and know that God used that in certain ways. Like one of the biggest areas he used it for me was just to depend on him, and to grow in my faith and hope and know what it is to depend on the Lord through hard times. And so, I'm so grateful that the Lord has healed me of that.
Yeah. And I'm glad that we shared this part of your story, because that would be so difficult to not have sleep for that long. And if there's anybody else out there who is struggling with that, like, it can give them hope that maybe there is an answer. Just keep looking. And yes, the Lord has purpose through our struggles, and, it could be our thorn in the side for a while. But health is a big thing. Health is a big thing. And so if you can continue to search and have people come around you and pray that you can find an answer, it's a great thing. So if anybody's struggling with sleep, maybe that's the answer for you. Well, let's get into your marriage and what all was going down for you guys early on. So you guys got married, and then you started having kids shortly after, right?
I think we waited 3 years before we had kids. Life was pretty smooth, both working, he was doing his band thing and traveling quite a bit. I was working full time and going to church. We lived in Texas, and anyway, we had our first kiddo. That was a whole new thing, but we did fine. I think it was fun. And then we were pregnant with our second, and things weren't quite as much fun.
What wasn't fun?
This was the 4th year of our marriage. I was invited, all the men in our church were invited to this barbecue. And our worship pastor was putting on this event. And I think it was, I still give him heck about this, because it was kind of promoted as this barbecue, like free barbecue. And I'm like, what
fun
man
event.
does not want to go to a barbecue?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm in. So I went to this barbecue, and before anybody was allowed to eat barbecue, we sat there and listened to our worship pastor share his testimony. And then there were like 8 other men that got up and shared their testimony of their struggles with pornography. And then at the end of them sharing their testimony, what I remember is, I remember our worship pastor saying, now, how many of you guys in this room have ever struggled with pornography? And there were probably 200, 250 guys in that room. And I just remember looking around, and every single guy was raising their hand. And then he said, I want you guys, whoever you came with or whoever you're sitting by, I just want you guys to practice confessing your sin to each other. And that was such a powerful moment, because I don't know that I had ever acknowledged that to anybody else, that I had an issue with pornography. And so those 2 guys I was with, we just kind of confessed our sin to each other. Then we rallied back together. And then he said, I want you guys to pray about going home and telling your wives. And, like, I was like, at that moment, I was like, oh man, I thought I was just going to have to tell these dudes, like,
and eat some barbecue.
And then it's like, we get to eat barbecue after this. And I'm like, my stomach's turning. I don't even want to eat anymore. Yeah. So here I am, like, eating a rib, but I'm like, I can't even finish the rib. And I go and throw my plate away. And like, I am dreading going home. And finally I go home, and I remember I was like, if I don't do this, these guys, like, it was kind of this accountability, because these guys knew what we were supposed to go do. And so I went home and I said, Shanna, do you mind sitting down for a second? And, she thought I was this perfect guy up until this point, and life had been perfect almost. We had 1 kid, and things were going great. Now it's 2 kids. And I just sat her down, and she's like, okay. And so then I just kind of opened up, and I said, Shanna, like, there's something I need to tell you. And, I just said, I have a struggle with pornography. And it was like a ton of bricks hit her. I mean, I could just see it in her face. And this is another beef I have with my worship pastor, because in their testimonies, they didn't really share like what their wives' reactions were or anything like that, what I should expect. And I don't know what I thought in my head, how she would react, but when I told her that, she was just hurt. I knew it was bad. And so like after we talked, and she was just not, I mean, she was, I think, hurt and angry and all kinds of emotions. And
Shanna, why don't you tell us, like, what were you going through then?
Yeah. I felt just blindsided, was super surprised. I was really kind of devastated. I felt, really sad. I felt, deceived and, hurt. I felt just kind of real ugly, like real, insecure about, who I am, and mad. I was mad too. I think it was just a whole lot of things. Out of nowhere, kind of.
And you're still sort of postpartum, but then also pregnant.
We had like a 1-year-old at home, and I was pregnant with our second. And so
that's a lot.
Super emotional. Yeah. And it was a lot.
But also, like, your body's growing, and can affect how. For
sure. Didn't necessarily feel the most beautiful anyway, like super insecure. And so definitely took it personal.
Sure. Zach, so with this kind of being thrown at you, like, you weren't willingly going into that conversation. Like, so where was your heart in that confession? Was it a confession where you felt like,
man, I think I remember just having a couple of different feelings. I think I was mad at myself because I think, for years and years, I had asked God to take that away from me. Like, God, I don't want this to be a part of my life. Like, I was exposed to it at 9 years old. And so, I remember being mad at myself and then just like sad that I'd ever let it go this far. And I remember that night, after we talked, she went to another room and just shut the door, didn't really want to be around me. And I called our worship pastor, who still is a licensed counselor. And I said, yeah, we need counseling. And, he's like, all right, let's set up a time. We'll meet. And, so I asked Shanna, do you want to go to counseling? And she said, yes. So we went, and, that was really huge for us. I think, our worship pastor, he asked several very pointed questions to Shanna. I think one of them I remember being like, don't you want Zach to come out with everything, right? I mean, I don't remember how he phrased it, but like
being honest. Is that what you mean? Like being honest?
Yeah.
With you about
I mean,
everything?
I think the question was something like, would you have rather not ever known, or don't you want to know every bit of it?
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you want things hidden? I'm like, well, no, but this is also really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then he was able, I mean, he really gave us some really good counsel. One of those things being, Zach, your phone is an open book for Shanna now. And if she wants to look at it, she can. If she's feeling insecure and wants to look through your text messages or through your photos or whatever, like your history, then you need to let her do that. And so, man, that next year was just brutal.
Yeah.
Because, I was, from my perspective, like it was all about regaining her trust. And, from her perspective, I'm sure it was about like, can I trust him? And so it was just a brutal, brutal year. But I had done really, really well for a couple of years, with not looking at things I shouldn't be looking at. Then we found ourselves in Tulsa. We had just moved here. I was in a moment of vulnerability, and here I was again, trapped, and I fell into temptation again. And Shanna came home, and I was an absolute wreck. And I remember just being absolutely broken over my sin, and that I could find myself in this place again, which I thought I was over. What I remember the most about this is Shanna's response the second time, because she very well could have gotten mad at me again, and it could have been another year from hell. And, but her response to me was, Zach, I'm not mad. I just want you to get help. And so, I called Pastor Michael,
Because at the time you had been recently put on staff, correct? At
Yeah,
Evergreen?
I mean, I had just come on staff at Evergreen, and Michael was very clear with me before I came on staff. He asked very pointed questions about how I protect myself from that stuff. And I'm pretty sure I shared part of my testimony with Michael about how it had been a struggle, and I had not dealt with that in a long time. And so I called Michael and I said, hey, can I set up a meeting? And so we did. And I just shared, man, I screwed up. And Michael was very, very gracious. Shanna was with us in that meeting. And I remember him saying, but you're done now, right? And I was like, absolutely, I'm done. And what's interesting about that second kind of confession time was like I said, the first time I think I was mad, even a little sad, but I think this time I was just completely broken.
Yeah.
Over this sin, and I somehow knew that God was setting me free from that. And I remember telling God, like, God, if you will set me free from this, like, I will try to help as many men as I possibly can get free from this. And God has been gracious to, he's given me opportunities to share my testimony with other men and help other men. And, but also I know that I'm still susceptible. Like, the enemy is still a real threat. And, James talks about how, he sets out a baited hook to see if you're going to take the bait. And so though I believe God has set me free from that, it's not like, I will never be tempted again,
right.
And so I've got to be living above reproach and guarding my eyes and taking necessary steps, which something I kind of skipped over was, we went through, I think it was when we were living in Tulsa after this second time, I knew that if I was going to truly remain free from this, like, I kind of had to cut the head off the snake. And so I got rid of my smartphone, got rid of laptops out of our home, gaming systems, anything that could connect to the internet in our house. I did not want a single thing that I could find that where I could mess up again. And so, and I tell guys that all the time, that if you're truly serious about this, then you need to get serious about this. Like, there are steps you need to take. And because there are so many ways to find it today. And so even with, the software that you can put on your computers, there are ways to get around that. And so when I meet with guys, I go straight to the heart and I say, you need to, like, if you're serious about getting rid of this in your life, you need to get rid of your smartphone. You need to cut out any access, because you will find a way to get to it. And so, this is the first time I've ever shared that part of my story, that, this was still a struggle when we moved to Tulsa, although it had not been for a very long time. And I just, Shanna, God had done a work in her heart. It was so easy to see that by her response, just saying, like, we need to get you help, which, we worked on that for a long time. And
Shanna, tell me your journey through that of, like, what did you do after the first time that you heard? Like, were there things that you had to work through, and what was that like for you, of the healing process from the first time that he confessed to you?
It was so eye-opening to realize that I really had Zach on a pedestal, and just recognizing, unhealthy places that I expected him to maybe meet needs or fill voids that weren't for him to be filling. So there was a whole lot of work in trying to learn to take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ and examining thoughts as they came. What is true here? Whether it had to do with what has he looked at today or what's he thought on today, or, just how is this going to affect us? Will we ever get past this or whatever? I have just loved God's word for so many years. And I found so much just comfort in the promises that God has for us. And I dug in Isaiah 26:3. I was clinging to that for a long time, and I still love that one. It says, "You will keep in perfect peace all who trust in you and whose thoughts are fixed on you." And I had to just cling to, God, you promise peace. And there's a whole lot of turmoil right now, and I don't feel like I'm at peace, but I can trust you with that. And so I feel like that first year was so hard on the outside. But even after that, like, it's just been this journey of, okay, where am I putting my hope? I've got to always consider, yes, I want a marriage where I can trust my husband, but ultimately I've got to trust the Lord that he can handle all of these hurts and that he can handle just everything that we've got.
What was it like to hear him confess to you a second time? And did you see a difference in him?
Yeah. I think he said he was a big mess. He was a really big mess. He laughed earlier that I cried about him not proposing or whatever. And so I kind of cry a lot, but we would joke like, "Oh, I never see you cry. I want to see you cry." But after that, I don't want to see him cry like that anymore. He was a big mess. So it felt different. And I think that God had really done such a work in my heart. I had to forgive him the first time. And so there was definitely some hurt, and it wasn't like everything was fine by any means. That was a really painful thing too. But I think that it was just a God thing that I don't know. I think that he had just done a work.
Well, I had pulled up some statistics. You can just Google it of like, what is it, the statistics of church-going men. And, some websites say it's 54% of practicing Christians, and others say 68% of church-going men. And then it even talks about within pastors, it's at least 50% of pastors, if not higher. And so this is a really big deal among Christians, and not just men. Women struggle with it too. But I think it's just very interesting with how the Lord has been lining up the episodes for this podcast of what we're featuring and what stories are being told. And so if you didn't catch it last episode, my husband and I shared our story, and he's on staff and he had that struggle. And now we have another one of our staff members who y'all had that struggle. And so it's a real thing, and women, like, we need to let the Lord work on our hearts as well. Like you were saying of how do we react to our husbands? Like, yes, he needs to know the depth of the pain and the depth of what that actually is. Jesus says that a man who looks at a woman with lust in his heart has committed adultery. And so it's a big deal. It's not just, I'm looking at somebody because she's cute. Like, it's a big deal. And men of guarding their hearts and their eyes, and just what kind of tools maybe are there out there that you guys might recommend for couples or for men in particular that have helped you?
Just to go back to the statistics a little bit, I would venture to say that those statistics are probably flawed.
Yeah. They're just the people who confess.
Yeah. I think the statistics are probably much, much higher than that, even with pastors, just from several things that I've seen, including that time where I was in a room with 250 men and all of them raised their hand. But I had an experience with an 85-year-old man one time where we were kind of all sharing stories. We were talking about the subject of purity, and And it was really awkward. I was like, this old man, he's probably feeling really awkward now. He's not gonna be able to relate to any of this. And then he asked if he could speak up, and he shared his testimony of how he had dealt with it since he was 12, and he had found some magazines from his dad. And it's just, it doesn't matter what generation you're in. It's an issue at large with men especially, but even women, you're right. But even with pastors, I wonder, when people are gathering that data, what pastors are going to confess that they have a problem.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think it's important for people like Andrew and like myself and other pastors to be vulnerable, because if pastors are struggling with it, the church at large is struggling with it.
Yeah.
And I think to see true freedom in the church, we need more pastors to be vulnerable. And some things that I would recommend, there is a series called the Conquer series. It's a video series, but it has a book as well. We do it here at our church. We try to do it in groups so that there's some accountability within the group. It's not bulletproof. And in fact, I would say I have not found anything yet that is bulletproof. But the biggest thing that I would suggest to any guy who has been crying out to the Lord to take this away, like I had been, like the biggest thing you can do is get serious about it and get rid of your smartphone. I know for some of you out there, you're like, well, what about work? How do I, my work makes me keep a phone or whatever. I'm just telling you, it's not going to go away unless you cut the head off the snake. And I'm telling you that 3 years that I went with a flip phone was some of the most brutal. I just remember getting group texts, and there was this little circle on the phone that would say connecting every time a text would come through. And then I'd get ready to respond with my T9 texting, and then another connecting would come up, and it was just like, and you want to throw the phone down. But I would also say that 3 years was me being able to renew my mind, as the Word of God says, like being able to, and there is scientific evidence that pornography damages the brain worse than cocaine. And so you have to create new neural pathways, and it's very scientific. But to use biblical language, it's renewing our mind. And so, I think the biggest thing you can do is really just take drastic steps. Because I'll say this, I was meeting with someone one time, and we were talking about, how's it going for you? Well, I got rid of everything, but I have this laptop and I found it through Microsoft Word. And I was like, at that moment, I was like, all right, like you will find a way.
Yeah.
If you're, because it is an addiction.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a drug. If you need it bad enough, you're going to find it.
Yeah.
And so,
well, and the industry too. I'd like to talk about that a little bit. The pornography industry is so nuts.
Yeah.
And I think also what could help is the women that are within that industry, a lot of times they were trafficked. And they not only are in a terrible situation, their image is being put everywhere. And so you're not only looking at something for your own pleasure, but you are putting your hand into that of trafficking women or even men who don't want to be there. Granted, there are some people who willingly put themselves in that industry, but most of the time they don't. And so that is something to think about too, of how am I treating this other woman who's made in God's image that doesn't want her image around on the internet, but it is. And even today now with AI stuff, it's been getting so crazy. We've got to be careful as parents too, because like your children's images can be taken now and used. People can just make it into a pornography image. And so it's very disgusting. It's very evil. And so it's bigger than just that lustful desire, which we all have. And then on the flip side of how it affects marriages, it's more than just hurting the husband and how he's affected, but it gets between you spiritually, it gets between you emotionally, and it gets between you sexually. Mm-hmm. And so if you want a good marriage and a good sex life, like that's going to affect it. Mm-hmm. And women, sex is very much tied to our emotions. And so it can really damage a lot of things.
And what would it look like if the church was more vocal about this, not just more vocal, but started taking drastic steps? Like we talk about, we throw the word revival around a lot in the church. And if we had a church full of men who were walking in freedom instead of walking in bondage, carrying strongholds, and leading their families from a place of freedom, I truly think we would see revival. And I don't know the answer. I've been asking the Lord how I can affect that. And so I don't know, maybe we'll have an update, but I've been praying, God, give me wisdom in how I can help more men. And so,
yeah. Well, to go along with our series that we're doing at the church right now, it's spiritual warfare. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is very much a spiritual warfare war that's going on. And the key that I know in my own marriage, but also your story, is the confession of when you're broken. And so when your heart becomes absolutely broken by your sin, and that is when Satan loses. And that is when we won that war, when we are completely broken about our sin and we surrender that to the Lord. And by his grace, he freed you from that, which is amazing. Are there any other things that you might say to a couple that finds themselves where maybe he just confessed or he's thinking about confessing to his wife? What might you say to him?
I would say to the man, your wife needs to see that you truly care about her, and ways to flesh that out are take drastic steps to get free from it. She needs to see that you have a plan of action and how you're going to do that. I think part of, the first time after that confession was like, I really didn't have much of a plan. And I think that could have helped in when I confessed, hey, I've already got a plan of how we're going to do this. And so I think having a solid plan, other than just putting software on your computer, but just as important, I think, is Shanna's perspective for women. What do women need to know?
Yeah.
Well, I think part of the plan has to be legit accountability. And I know for us, it was not helpful or healthy for me to be the accountability partner. That conversation never went well. And I don't think that gives opportunity for Zach to be honest. Not that we can't talk about it, but does that make sense?
Yeah. But why do you want to keep confessing and hurting your spouse?
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that that second confession was 10 years ago. And I think Zach's done a great job of surrounding himself with men who will ask hard questions and men that I can be confident are going to do it,
Yeah.
And so for for a wife who has had that news, I think it's so important to know that you're not alone, and that it really, really, really hurts. Like the way that you feel, I mean, I think that's pretty valid.
Yeah.
And I would be happy to, I would love to give you a big hug and, sit there and cry with you.
And I think Shanna's being very humble, but she offers a lot of wisdom in these situations where we've met with couples, and just watching her communicate with a wife, because the biggest part is, I would say, for those of you who are feeling like there is no hope in your marriage, there is hope. There's hard work involved in that, but there is hope, and there can be a light at the end of the tunnel. So yeah.
How has this made you guys stronger as a couple?
Well, I think we have seen the worst in each other, and we still like each other. I don't know. I mean, I tell guys a lot that, we went through that really hard year after that first confession, and that was brutal. But I look back, and I know that our marriage is stronger than it's ever been, because we've gone through hard things. And I think if you would ask any couple, if you look at any marriage, we have people in our life who, like, we just admire their marriage from afar. And I think any couple like that has probably gone through some hard things. And so I just think that we love each other more, I think, just because we've gone through hard things together, and it's pretty awesome.
Well, I can see it. I mean, I wish sometimes that we had this video, because, throughout your story, Zach, when you would mention Shanna, almost every time you had tears in your eyes, which is so sweet for a wife to see that. And so I do see the love that you guys have between you two in your marriage. And I think that that's just a testament of coming through something really, really hard and still having a really deep love, and probably deeper, way deeper now than it used to be. And so marriage is very much worth it. And confession is hard. I mean, wives, we have to confess things to our husbands too. Like, we're not perfect. We all sin and fall short of the glory of God. And by His grace, we can overcome really hard things. So thank you guys so much for sharing your story with us today, and being vulnerable, and just uplifting the church and giving hope to couples out there. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you would like more information about our church, please visit our website at evergreenbc.org.